Thanks for joining in on this WEDF session today. My name is Serene, and many years ago I ended up creating something called Snowflake. Normally I'm just the concert pianist playing concerts, but I do have two careers. I'm also a technologist. I taught myself to code when I was 9 years old. And since then, I have written a lot of code and gotten up to all sorts of shenanigans and fun projects. And so I'm delighted to have been invited today to speak a little bit about one of those old projects. By the way, I've been on the road for a few weeks now, traveling and working probably too much in relation to Project Snowflake, given everything that's happening with it and with the world right now. So I apologize in advance for the inevitable jet-lagged incoherence. But in any case, it will be fun to dive in a little bit into Snowflake and internet freedom with you today. So, thank you for your time, and let's get started. First, it may be a good idea to ask ourselves a fun question. Why does the internet suck? I ask myself this question quite a lot. Not because we don't know the reasons why the internet sucks today, but as a starting place for making the internet better. Don't get me wrong, the internet can be great. It certainly changed my life for the better, at least in the early days of the internet. It was slow, but it was great, and it felt like a place where things were truly possible, rather than this fully captured and co-opted, weird, walled garden thing where everybody has to pay rent in the form of attention. And I'm not so sure we can say anymore that it's a net positive, certainly for the younger folks growing up on the internet right now in 2022. The reasons for the internet getting worse can vary, but I know much of it has to do with the fact that as a species, we don't yet know how to actually handle or govern this thing. We don't have the social technology needed to manage the network technology of a planet. And that network itself is now embedded in our lives in a way which worsens rather than improves our overall ability to coordinate. So that's a rather suboptimal place for us to be. For most of human history, we did not have a planetary communications network at near light speed. But now that we do, we rely on it fundamentally for everything. And this can be useful and profitable, but it also means that when the internet is compromised, things can get very bad. In the early days, the internet was on its way to being this decentralized, anti-fragile thing with multiple stakeholders building out all this infrastructure and all these protocols needed to generate this super cool global network of the future. But it's been a few decades now, and it still doesn't actually work that well. And these days, it gets compromised, and it compromises the people who use it. Whether the internet is being censored, throttled, manipulated, or surveilled, people using the internet are having not as good of a time as they should. From having their data sold or traded, or being traced and hunted by surveilling bodies for the sake of control and or profit, or simply being unable to have free, unfettered access. In my view, these are the biggest reasons for the internet sucking currently. We can see this playing out today in the Russia-Ukraine war, which is still going on, by the way, with internet censorship coming hand in hand with the propaganda needed to prosecute the war. We have kind of a Iron Curtain 2.0. Or with Iran's internet shutdowns most recently, and in many other areas of our planet. And in the West, certainly there is plenty of censorship as well, especially mainstream platforms like Google and Apple censoring and taking down VPN apps from the app stores by the request of the censors. Roskomnadzor is Russia's internet censorship body. One can see how the censorship works in conjunction with propaganda by censoring counter-narrative websites. An example of this is 200rf.com, which is blocked in Russia, but which hosted testimony from captured Russian soldiers who were describing how they were accepted into this war and misled into thinking they were fighting to liberate the Ukrainians. Or the current protests in Iran, which were spurred by the murder of Mahsa Amini and have continued to grow. But one of the ways which the Iranian government wishes to stifle that is through internet shutdowns. Given the current landscape of the internet and how it is being held hostage or weaponized against citizens, it's clear that different solutions were, are, and will be needed to protect the free and open internet and our future. I've been working on various methods for the last 10 years, and one of the methods I created a while ago ended up being fairly useful. Back in 2015, although I obviously couldn't foresee the specifics of a Russia-Ukraine war or the specifics of a protest in Iran or the specifics of any conflict which results in information manipulation, censorship, and the causing of the internet to suck more, I knew that the trend towards censorship would only increase. I knew that the existing incentives of our world demand ever more control over the information environment, and regimes would fixate on finding more ways to control it and develop ever more sophisticated censorship techniques and systems. This pattern would only continue, and while existing protocols, VPNs, tools built by colleagues in the internet freedom community have been wonderful and useful for many use cases, I also knew that it's an ongoing process and that in the future, these increasingly sophisticated censorship methods would eventually make the current tools less useful. Also worth noting is that even finding the context to do real work is itself a challenge. To do real work that can truly help the integrity of the internet for the benefit of all humans, instead of maintaining various ideological myths like not being evil, while actually exploiting the internet at every level, manipulating attention economies for profit, turning users into commoditized eyeballs, and ensuring those eyeballs always only look at the content you want them to see and the content which generates the most profit. In any case, I was already interested in this field, of internet freedom. So let's talk about the Tor project. The Tor project has been around for about 20 years, has interesting origins, and has, in the main, done great work in building out an anonymity network through its onion routing protocol, and has helped many people. I believe a colleague from Tor is also speaking at WEDF, and she will give more in-depth context from Tor. In relation to internet freedom, it's very cool and very useful, which therefore means it draws a lot of attention from various actors which wish to block people's access to Tor. According to the Tor project, Tor blocks trackers, defends against surveillance, resists fingerprinting, and uses multi-layered encryption so you can browse freely. Tor does a good job in most circumstances, but in places where governing bodies have made an effort to restrict access to Tor, they have been quite successful. Sensors can filter by destination. They filter with deep packet inspection. And then now they're getting really fancy where they are even filtering traffic if it looks suspiciously too random. You see, to enter the Tor network is similar to accessing a website that's already blocked. You have to start somewhere, and in vanilla Tor, those are entry nodes, but those are easy to find and easy to block. So after that came Tor bridges, and these were more temporary rotating first hops into the Tor network, but those can also be easily enumerated and blocked by a motivated adversary. While existing protocols, internet freedom tools, and VPNs have been helpful in many cases, I also knew that in the future, we needed much harder to block, ephemeral, but very easy to use proxies to support freedom of access to the internet. Many years ago, when I was still a teenager, I was hired by Google. In my brief time there, I ended up becoming the first engineer at Google Ideas, which has since been rebranded to Jigsaw. It was there that I first began exploring ways to leverage infrastructure and distributed resources in fun ways to actually help people living in places affected by conflict, instability, and repression. To help the internet, to actually help the users on the internet, rather than just optimize ads. One of my main projects at the time, uProxy, I built in a very short amount of time, such that it could be demonstrated at the Google Ideas Summit, which succeeded and led to the growth of an engineering team there. But uProxy worked too well, and Google killed it. And I also quit. Well, I've been rather quiet about that time in my life, having since largely left the tech scene to mostly play piano concerts. It's a relevant part of the story, because right around that time, you see, I happened to become one of the most experienced people in the world at WebRTC, and specifically using WebRTC for censorship circumvention. And I had some new ideas around how to architect a microproxy network using WebRTC. And I wanted to build an open source circumvention tool that could not be compromised at any level. And it was around this time that I began Snowflake. Snowflake is that ephemeral, hard to block, easy to use proxy we were looking for. And by 2016, I had built the prototype, a functioning version, and demonstrated the very first working Snowflake in Valencia at the Tor developer meeting, as I'd wanted to apply Snowflake to Tor as its first use case. So, what is Snowflake? And what makes it harder to block and easier to use? Snowflake allows users in censored regions to connect to users in non-censored regions using very temporary peer-to-peer connections, which look like any other WebRTC traffic, and as a result, circumvent censors. There are many esoteric details to make this thing work. In order to understand how Snowflake works, it's best to start at the beginning. Here's the original sketch of Snowflake, which I did back in 2015. Let's say you're a user in a filtered region, with the goal of browsing the internet freely, like a normal person, instead of having everything restricted and the overall experience being this weird dystopian information war that's trying to manipulate your mind. So you'd use an app, in this example, the Tor browser, which has the Snowflake client as a transport plugin. Snowflake has been included with the Tor browser for many years now as one of the default routes for when Tor itself cannot be accessed normally. As of today, the version of Snowflake in Tor is still largely legacy code that I wrote years ago in Golang. It adheres to the Go PTlib pluggable transport spec version 2.1. An important thing to note here is that Snowflake is meant to work for many use cases, not just Tor browser. Tor browser is the first use case, but pluggable transports are supposed to be pluggable. In order to get past the censor to a Snowflake peer, you have to find a proxy out there in the wild and be able to initially reach that proxy without being flagged by the censor. The broker is a service which matches clients and proxies and is an important part of the Snowflake architecture. The broker is essentially the signaling channel where the WebRTC SDP handshakes can happen. This is needed before the peers can set up the direct peer-to-peer WebRTC connection. SDP, which is Session Description Protocol, describes messages in pairs of offers and answers, which tell the peers how to reach me from the public internet, because most people are behind routers and such. WebRTC is cool because it handles piercing nets, network address translation, automatically, so that people don't have to fiddle with manual port forwarding on routers. And all of this is part of why Snowflake has been very easy to use for most users. This process of NAT traversal and simplification is called ICE negotiation, interactive connectivity establishment. And the ICE is related to why I named this project Snowflake in the first place. And also to sort of troll people in 2016, given the cultural namespace collisions of that word. Anyways, this offer-answer exchange can itself get blocked. And so the method we use to get around that is domain fronting. Domain fronting is another topic. It's a neat way to use an unintended feature of TLS to circumvent censors using a concept called collateral freedom, where you essentially rely on a CDN that the censor does not want to block. Domain fronting is good for the initial step in Snowflake because it's very hard to block, but then the actual traffic is handled by WebRTC. And this is part of what makes Snowflake powerful, is that it scales much better than if all of the traffic were domain fronted. However, this all requires the cooperation of CDNs. But since 2018, the major CDNs have been reducing support for domain fronting. And it's the usual excuse of infopocalypse horsemen and justifying the reduction of civil rights by bringing up criminal usage. But this is a fallacious framing that's hurting the free and open internet. In the case of Snowflake, these various methods are used to establish the peer-to-peer connection in the first place. Once you've found your temporary proxy, then you have a WebRTC data channel in between, which then relays your traffic to the destination. In the case of Tor, this is the Tor bridge, which is the destination that the censor was trying to block in the first place, and the reason behind going through all of this Snowflake stuff in the first place. Once reaching there, you can now establish a Tor circuit. In the use case where it is independent from Tor, now you just establish a normal web browsing session directly. What makes Snowflake so easy to use is how simple it is. You can support internet freedom just by opening a browser tab. By opening a browser tab, you run a proxy, and you're now a peer for someone out there who needs help accessing the internet. I built the first functioning Snowflake in 2016, and with the help of others, got this deployed in Tor browser. That's where the story paused for a while, at least on my end. And while I continued to help out where it made sense, I needed to take a break from tech generally. And I moved on to other projects, such as playing piano concertos around the world. And I knew in the back of my head that Snowflake might be useful someday for people who needed access. And as an open source project, I hoped that it would be in good hands. So, in early 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. At this point, they also block most other VPNs and internet freedom tools, but somehow Snowflake survives. It still works, and usage of Snowflake skyrockets. But this is legacy code. It was only an experiment, not fully ready to become production-grade infrastructure. And while friends and colleagues in the open source and internet freedom community have done amazing work to build it out further and scale it up, overall, the Snowflake project needs much more support from everybody so that this can be truly reliable, performant, global censorship circumvention, especially when people's lives are at stake. And then we have the internet shutdowns in Iran, where once again, Snowflake usage skyrockets. In many cases, Snowflake was the only option for people to access the internet in places where the internet is blocked. The only way for them to stay in touch with friends and family during a wartime, and to organize themselves against oppression and stay safe. In a very clear and direct way, when I hear of people wanting to help fellow humans in conflict zones, in challenging times around the world, I love knowing that a very real way to do so is now as simple as leaving a browser tab open, to open up a connection for a real human somewhere on the planet to access freedom. That alone is powerful. What started as just an experiment is now relied on by hundreds of thousands of people and growing. Snowflake is popping up in the media and getting more attention, and the base of users and supporters is growing on both sides of the censor wall. This is the internet coming together to defend itself. I was able to build this originally thanks to support from Open Tech Fund and Radio Free Asia. As of 2022, the internet is splintering and will splinter further if nothing is done to stop it. Actually, we can think of the internet in a similar way to this XKCD comic from 2010. There is a glaring omission from this, though, that off the map we find that there are censored regions which cannot access or communicate with the uncensored regions of the internet. It's easy to look at a map of a faraway place and talk about a conflict in a way that makes us forget that real people live there. But real people do live there in terribly oppressive situations, whether in Ukraine, Russia, Iran, and other places around the world. But there is something each of us can do to help to bring the continents of this splintered internet back together. When one wishes to build a bridge across a chasm, one way to do so is to start by shooting a thin line across. Then you use that line to pull over a slightly thicker and stronger line. And then you use that line to pull across an even thicker and stronger line. And eventually you have enough to build a real bridge. Snowflake has been that very first line across to the other side of the chasm to build the beginnings of a bridge to reverse the trend of the continents of the internet splintering currently. And now we are ready for that second line and beyond. There are many more bridges to build, and many more that are currently being built. The more connections are established, the stronger the bridges become, and the more people within these censored regions can be pulled back to the free internet. Many years ago, Buckminster Fuller wanted to find ways for the world to work for everyone. There are quite a lot of challenges, many large-scale and existential, for our species to overcome the rest of this century, which we must confront together, all of us on this funny rock spinning through space. But in order for the world to coordinate together and overcome these global challenges, having an internet which isn't compromised and where communication is even possible seems like a prerequisite. Snowflake is only one of the many pieces needed to get us to a better future. I've been doing internet freedom work for the last 10 years because at least this first step is needed. I want to do my part to protect online freedoms for everybody on our planet. I want to help out our friends at the Tor project and our friends in the broader internet freedom community, and everybody on this planet who wishes and deserves to simply be able to access the internet. So if you would like to help, I have two simple asks. One is open up a browser tab that has Snowflake running on it. Become a peer that can help others access the internet. It's the simplest thing that you can do to make a major impact. Second, if you want to stay informed on the next phase of this work to ensure internet freedom works better and more reliably for many more people, I will be sharing something soon. So you will only get a one-time email from me with the launch of my next project, and I will never contact you again there and destroy the list. I'm not a fan of spam, and this is not a newsletter. It is a single email that I'll send out once when I have something to announce. Thank you for your time today, and a big thanks to WEDF, Tor, Open Tech Fund, and everyone who has been involved in this project for internet freedom. And a big thanks to all of you who have opened up that browser tab to run a Snowflake proxy.